Hello and welcome to the Spencer Scott Holmes podcast. I'm your host, and today we got super special guest here, Branden Sanderson, comic book creator. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. I know this podcast has been like literally months in the making almost, or something like that, because I'm trying to think of which was like the first place we met, but we met in those handful of Comic-Cons in the Central Valley. You know?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Stockton.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Stockton was the very first. Yeah, that's right. I know, because I remember we were right across each other booth-wise there and so on like that. But you know, over the last 6+ months or something like that, you know, we've crossed paths a handful of times and so on like that. And we're like, dude, we got a podcast. And, you know, just that's always kind of how it is. Sometimes it's just the times never connect, but we're getting one in right now, even if it's going to be a little bit of a short one. Hey,
we dodged each other like kids playing tag.
Yeah, exactly. Just somehow, some way, just never, just could not combine forces, could not do the fusion dance of any sort. But now, you know what? Now we're finally doing it, and here we go.
Let's go.
Exactly. And, well, I know you've been doing, almost like practically a Comic-Con every single weekend, but the one I kind of wanted to hear even more about was the one that you did, it seemed like about maybe 3 weeks ago or something like that, but you were in Las Vegas, breaking out of the California territory zone.
Yes, my first out-of-state show.
So how did that one all go? That one just sounds like something different, at least.
Dude, that was a crazy show. So it was the Level Up comic, anime, and video game show. And there weren't a lot of comic book guys there. There was myself and a couple other indie creators. One was right across from me, and they had about 8 different titles that they were selling. And then there was down the artist alley and one row over, there was one more. And then there was 1 or 2 guys selling like back issues and stuff, and that was it. Everything else was just Funko Pop, anime, and gaming.
Yeah, and I know that that's sort of been kind of the bane to many, especially indie comic book creators, but just comic book creators in general, is that recently the cons have just gotten to that point where they've jammed too many things into one Comic-Con, and I think that's kind of in a sense, it's very much diluted the comic book section of it all. I mean, it's not saying that people can't be into all that kind of stuff, but I kind of hate to say it. I think the average person's mostly only into about 2 or 3 things. So,
right. Well, and all that other stuff is expensive. I mean, if you're coming to get some gaming stuff or any of that or some Funkos, I mean, those things run hundreds of dollars, some of them.
Yeah, so someone, and I always feel like the average person probably has give or take $200 in their pocket,
Yeah.
and that can go by real quick, and they still need money for food, they still need money for a couple other things, maybe even getting themselves home and so on like that. So that leaves them with maybe bare minimum of a little $100+ of expendable cash.
Yeah. Now the good news for wasn't a lot to pick from. They were spending money at our booth, which I thought was great. So, having the table there and maybe being, just one of the few fruit on the tree actually got, I think, probably helped with sales maybe as much as it hurt. And I was able to convert a couple of manga fans over to my more Western comic.
Well, I mean, I guess there is always something to be said. Like, if you are one of the few indie comic book guys there, is no matter what, there's always those people that are coming, looking at the Comic-Cons and looking for something that you can't get, at your regular store. Because, I mean, that was when I went to Comic-Cons, that was my first thing that I want. I'm like, I want, like, books that I can't find just normally anywhere. I can't even maybe find them online, that kind of stuff,
Yeah, I was always looking for either that, or if it was something that I get at a comic shop, like a back issue, that it needed to be just marked way down to where, it's like a $150 book that I'm finding for $75. Then those are the 2 things I look for at cons.
Yeah, the actual good deals, not like the vice versa, where it's like, hey, you marked this up like twice as high as one on eBay.
Yeah, exactly. Like one of the guys that had the back issue booths. He had a first appearance of Carnage, Amazing Spider-Man 365, I want to think it is, 362. But first Carnage, I mean, normally that book is crazy value. He had it for $90. So that I thought that was a great deal. But unfortunately, by the time I finally got back over to his booth to pick it up, it had sold probably the first hour the show was open. I'm sure. I just saw it when everyone was setting up.
Yeah, and as long as if you don't grab those deals right then and there, that's it.
Yeah.
My friend Buddy actually has those first handful of runs of the Carnage ones that I think he got, right when they came out back in the day, not thinking anything of it, you were just buying a new Spider-Man book.
Yeah, I had those too, and they were just trashed. Because I didn't think those books would be worth what they are now.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because it's like, that's like the thing with all the collectible markets is like, there's a certain amount of things that are worth a ton of money, but for the most part, the majority of things aren't really worth anything. It's like you can have something that's be like 80 years old, and you're like, this is going to be worth something, and then it's like $5. You kidding me? This thing's almost like pushing like 100 years, and it's not worth something.
I know, and yet some book that came out in like 1998 is going. First appearance of Deadpool? I think it was 1993, and that book is $2,800, $3,000.
Yeah, it's so bizarre how certain ones can kind of go in price and just the change and all that kind of stuff and whatnot. But
I remember I bought 3 copies of the first Deadpool when it was new,
and
because I bought it original off the newsstand, and then I think maybe a month later it was already about $10, so I bought a couple more. And then I sold them on eBay a number of years back because they were worth like $300 or $400. I'm like, it'll never be worth more than this. Time to cash out.
Yep, I've done that so many times. Because I used to do a lot of like buying and selling of video games to kind of go along with like collecting and so on. And you would see that point where you're like, oh my gosh, it's never going to be worth more than that. And then 10 more years later, you're like, oh man, if I would have held on to that, I could have sold it for 5 times more than what I got.
It was only fairly recently that I even realized that video games go crazy in value.
Yeah. Well, in video games, it's been about like a 20-year period that they've kind of went up. And they've definitely stair-stepped up more and more as time has kind of gone on. It's ironic that like PC games, on the other hand, just don't seem to have a whole lot of value unless it's a very specific one. It's there's that weird thing that there's like, this one was worth a lot, but this one over here that's realistically the exact same thing, not worth the same. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in fact, a PC game was how I learned that. I went to a Goodwill store a number of years ago, and my youngest son loves Warhammer. He doesn't play the mini game, but he reads the books, and he liked the video games.
Yeah.
And he really liked the real-time strategy game. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a whole series, and it was one game, and it just had a bunch of expansions.
Mm-hmm.
And he would buy all the expansions, and there was one that I guess was really hard to find, or he never even knew existed. We're at a Goodwill store. We just saw it in there, and I picked it up. And, he loaded it, and he played it for a couple of months. And I was telling a buddy of mine who also likes the game that we had found it. And he pulled it up for me on eBay, and it was going for like $250 on eBay. And I paid 99 cents for it at a Goodwill.
Well, and that's one of the best parts about Goodwill. Goodwill always seems to just literally give away anything they have there for like next to nothing.
Oh, yeah. No, I have cashed out Goodwill and like antique stores.
Mm-hmm.
I found great things.
The thing is as time has kind of gone on, I feel like people have become a lot more savvy to it. Like, it felt like, once again, about 20 years ago when I was kind of collecting all kinds of games from, like, flea markets and so on like that, that was that time period where people just kind of said, whatever, here's an old video game thing. We'll just give it to you for $5 or $10, and you would just pick up deals galore left and right. And then I think it got to the point, once people sort of had cell phones in their hands and they could check eBay on the fly, and people just got kind of accustomed to it, that sort of changed the whole game of getting, like, good deals continuously.
Oh, seriously. I saw that happen in real time. I went to there's an antique store near my house. And I discovered it when my wife was looking for something for the house. I don't remember what, but she wanted something specific. And she wanted it to be kind of old-timey and authentic looking. So we were going around to antique stores, and we went into one that had a little comic corner, like with a bunch of boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was flipping through them, and everything was $1, whatever you found. And I found a first reverse flash.
Oh, wow.
And so I picked that up. It wasn't in the best shape, but still, first reverse flash. So I picked it up. It was just $1, and I thought, well, she didn't give me a lot of time to look. They had like 8 boxes. And so I went back to the same shop probably about, 8 months or a year later, and now all of a sudden they're varied in prices, and some of them are behind the counter. So they figured it out at some point.
Yeah, probably what happened is she had, some friend or relative come in and say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what are you doing here? You can't just put $1 for all these ones or whatever. Like, you gotta check these ones. You got some real, cash making things here," and so on.
Yeah, I'd hate to think it was some like narc customer came in and is like, "Hey, man, did you know these are worth things?"
Yeah, there's probably somebody like that. You're like, no, stop. That's our special place for deals. That's also the one too. There's someone's like, I'd be like, "Hey, give you $50 for all 3 of these big boxes right here," and they'd be like, "Oh, well, sure, take them, go for it. Here's some more I had behind the counter that I just didn't have any room to place yet," and they would just hand you them all right off the bat and so on like that, and be like, "Oh, cool, awesome."
Yeah. I used to look for stuff like that all the time, but I mean, if you find something like that, usually you're like on a road trip and you're stopping in some small town.
Mm-hmm.
And you just pop in somewhere and you just shot in the dark, you found something. That's when you find that stuff anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not as common anymore. Not saying that once in a blue moon I might not find something, but yeah, it just felt like there was a time where you could almost guarantee go to just about any thrift store, flea market, what have you, and you would always just find something that you could kind of take home. And then it was for a nice, reasonable price. Now sometimes you go to it's not really like certain stores and it's like they'll have stuff and be like, dude, it's like, hate to say it, but it's like you got that for twice the price it is on eBay and it's not even in good condition. At least the guy on eBay will give it to me in good condition. And worst case, if for some reason something was messed up, I'm still at least covered by eBay. What are you going to provide for me?
Yeah, right.
And
it's just, I remember it's been fairly recent that everybody started picking up that 90s comics are starting to get valuable, especially like 90s Marvel is getting crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And because a lot of the MCU is drawn from a lot of those stories.
Yeah.
But I tried my best to get ahead of that curve and find some of the more hole in the wall comic shops and stock up on some titles and some books I knew were going crazy. Like I got the Young Avengers as soon as I started seeing them pop up at the MCU on Disney Plus. I knew that book would get crazy, and it did. And the Strange Academy #1, that book is insanely valuable now. And there's not even like a specific character that appears in that. It's just so many first appearance characters have their first appearance in that book that they just figure it's going to be worth something. One of these characters is going to get it like a movie or a Disney show.
Yeah, exactly. Gosh, that just makes me start thinking. I'm like, wait a second. Moon Knight just came out. I want to say I have like the first 13 issue run of Moon Knight, if not maybe even more of those. Yeah. And it's one of those ones that literally I got in a trade 10 years ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just
those and the Stephen Platt run towards the end of his kind of 80s and 90s series.
Mm-hmm.
Those books are all really valuable too.
Yeah, I need to take a look. I totally spaced out I even had those because that's the only downfall. It gets to that one point where you almost forget which books you have anymore because you just got boxes upon boxes. And my favorite part's when you go in through your house and you find a random box that you totally forgot about.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, well, what's this one here? Oh, look at all these books in here.
Oh, I find those because I have a shelf out in my garage that keeps them up off the ground in a fairly safe, temperature-controlled-ish area.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go through those boxes and forget. It's like, I didn't even remember I collected this series.
Yeah, it's like you almost get brand new things. You're like, man, I could read this now. I didn't even know I had this.
Oh, I know. I collect these little miniature things called Hero Clicks. It's like a superhero tabletop game.
Uh-huh.
And they are figures. They come with little character cards, and on the cards they have significant comic book appearances. And I remember when the new Thor movie got announced, they said, "Oh, it's gonna be the first appearance of Jane Foster as Thor."
Mm-hmm.
And everybody went and hunted down that Jason Aaron comic.
Yeah,
where she first appeared a few years ago, and I had that one already because I bought it when it was new. But I remembered from the game on the back of the card, it said her first appearance was something else because they had a figure of her, and I looked, and it's actually in a What If comic from the 70s.
Yeah,
they did What If Jane Foster became Thor, and that's where the first Jane Foster Thor is.
Yeah, because I was gonna say I knew that was. I felt like that was farther back, unless it was just
mm-hmm.
unless there's not a Lady Thor kind of thing that's a different version, not Jane Foster, but somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, no. There's in Earth X in the future.
That's right. Okay, as I say, because I want to say that there was also that one too, but yeah, it's weird how those things are just those kind of they're almost become kind of. It sounds weird, but when they kind of come out, they're almost like throwaway comics. Nobody thinks much of it. Here's this little extra series, whatever. Boop, toss to the side, goes in the dollar bin. Next thing you know, 15 years later, everybody wants it.
What Ifs can be crazy because they it's almost like What If. they had two versions of What If. You had the What If, this is why a story went a certain way, kind of like what if Jean Grey, never became Phoenix or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then they'll do kind of like what if, and then what if Spider-Man had a daughter, and that's the first Mayday Parker is actually in a What If book. And so they'll do these stories every now and then where it'll be what if Captain America and Black Widow had a daughter, and they'll create a character for it. And if that character is well responded, then they'll bring her back somehow.
Yeah.
And so, Thor, it took him about 40 years to come back to the idea, but the Jane Foster.
Yeah, and I always like those kind of what if stories and like, kind of the alternate like universes kind of things and like DC and whatnot. I always just think it's kind of fun to have these just different takes we can kind of go of certain characters and just like say, hey, let's see what happens.
Well, and now you have DC with the Omniverse, so like everything that can happen does happen in their world, and continuity is just a madhouse. So
yeah, and I mean,
you never know what's going to come back.
Yeah, and that sounds like chaos, but I'm always kind of a big fan of like keeping everything almost like yes, everything happens, good, bad, and ugly. Like I think it should all be represented. It's one of those ones that's like because like movies there was that period for a while where movies were doing that thing where they sort of said like, hey, people like the first one, so let's cut the sequels out, and now the new one's almost going to tie into the first, and that always bothered me as like I felt like that was just like a kick to the fans where it's just like no for the people who actually like the entire series, like we're just going to kind of forget about you and your middle run.
And I kind of feel like if you're a writer and if you're gonna take on a movie franchise, you're gonna take on a long running comic, then if you don't have the skill to handle your story within the continuity, then I don't know that you got the chops to come in and do what you're doing.
Yeah.
So like if you're gonna take on X-Men, and it's like, yeah, but you know what? They got so much lore and so much continuity, and I don't want to have to deal with that. So we're just gonna go ahead and reboot the whole series. No, you gotta keep the lore and everything in there. I mean, you don't have to go back to it.
Yeah.
But if there's a character that's dead, you at least have to know that and acknowledge either you're resurrecting them somehow or they're not in your story.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I just kind of feel. It's one of those ones like it should just be represented and not forgotten in a sense. You know what I mean? Because just because let's just say, just because somebody might not like a certain issue, that's not saying that somebody else might not be their favorite one. It's the same thing with movies. Somebody might like, oh, well, number 2 or number 3 wasn't nearly received as well. It's like, yeah, but that could also be somebody else's favorite one. So who are you to say like why that doesn't exist or why we should kind of just like brush it under the rug or anything like that?
We had a lot of those movies. I mean, like the Halloween movies are great examples, much as I like the new ones.
Yeah, I mean, I still like the new ones, but they do that thing where they skip all the in-betweens.
Yeah, I think Halloween 3 was the first one I ever saw, so it just kind of has a soft spot. I have a soft spot for that one just because that was my introduction to the franchise. I went back and saw them again in order. But I remember I was at a friend's house. I think we were having a sleepover, and we'd rented a bunch of R-rated movies, and we were kids and thought it was great. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we had like Friday the 13th, I think 7, Halloween 3. I mean, nothing we didn't know what was going on, but you don't really need to know a lot of lore to understand Jason Voorhees.
No, you could jump into any of those, and that's when I was a kid. That was the same thing me and my buddy would do. We'd just go rent the VHSs of just random horror movies, every Friday night or something like that, and just go through them and just watch, 2 or 3 different ones every single weekend, and that was just kind of like the good old learning experience of the horror genre.
Yeah. My friend and I, I had a friend that lived across the street from me, and not within walking distance to our house was just a mom pa video store, and we made it a goal. We tried to rent every horror title they had in order, starting in the A's, and I think we ended up. But yeah, we tried to see every horror movie in a video store once. We got to L, and that's when we had to stop.
Yeah, it gets to a certain point. You can only see so much, but no, that's always kind of fun to do and just get that experience and so on like that. But since we're kind of going on the speed run of a podcast, let's jump into a little bit of all about your book right here.
All right.
Because I know that the last issue I got, Malevolent Rising, was issue 6, but I almost want to say you're 1 or 2 more issues ahead by this point. Or I know you at least have that graphic novel. Yeah,
the graphic novel is done that collects all 6. And I am literally drawing the last page of, because they're not going to be in issue 7. We're just starting a new chapter. So it's going to be a number 1, and it's Malevolent Rising Matriarch. And this one, it's not really a volume 2 as much as it's a 1.5. I have to do a little world building to get to 2.
Okay.
So this one brings back one of the main characters, and the others are taking a story off. And we're going to go into her past quite a bit and something that comes from her past is come to the forefront and is going to plant the seeds for what the enemy is going forward in the next chapter.
Yeah, well, see, that would be kind of cool just to have that kind of almost like the breather chapter of kind of doing all your building, kind of coming back in action, and then leading up with all these extra details, and then going hardcore into, technically, I guess you would say the second volume section.
Yeah. The actual sequel, because this one, it's just kind of a bridge. I don't even want to call it a volume 2, and in fact, I think issue ends with a teaser for the next volume, and it's Adversary is the next one.
And then are you just going to kind of go with single issues in this one, or is this going to be like one thick issue and then start the next run?
Yeah, but it's not going to be as long. This one's only going to be 4 books.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it's still graphic novels worth and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we'll collect it in the end. And because I usually do, when I first started the book, I did an Indiegogo to crowdfund it. And it worked out really well. And then I just kept with it because it let me know how many to print, how many people wanted. So I just kind of did it for like pre-orders. So I'd put them out there and I would get as many orders as I would get. And then within a couple, and I wouldn't even start it until the book was done. And then within about 6 weeks of that, I'd fulfill all the orders and then, be halfway done, halfway on the road to the next one. So, and I probably won't even put this one online until it's the graphic novel.
Yeah, well, that's how I always sort of felt, too, like when it comes to comic books. Because I've never done an Indiegogo yet, but I've done a handful of Kickstarters and so on like that. And to me, I used to always like to say I treat them like a pre-order. That's kind of how it is, because it seems kind of weird to, because, like, sometimes you'll see certain comic books where, like, they'll ask for all the money up front and they haven't even drawn a single page yet or something like that. And it's kind of like... That seems like I don't like the idea of that, because then it's like, gosh, it's like you're buying a book that you might not get for like a year or so. And
I get it, because a lot of the times it's somebody who's written a book but hasn't secured an artist. They don't have money to pay an artist yet. So I get that. But usually if I'm going through, because I'll back Kickstarter and Indiegogo if I see something that looks really interesting. And if I'm going through, but usually I need to see some of the artwork to see that the book actually is getting made and see if it's going to ultimately be something that I want, because a lot of the time they'll just post a promo issue or a promo image rather.
Yeah.
And then none of the guts of the book, and you don't really know what you're getting. And then it shows up and, it's maybe not what you were expecting, or it's in black and white, or it's really short maybe, and you pay $20 for a 22-page comic.
Yeah, well, yeah, because some people just charge an outrageous price for like that. Like my kind of... My thing is like, the price of a comic book still should never be more than like a Marvel or a DC one. If you're charging more than one of their issues, granted, I know that they can get their prints so much cheaper because, they're printing out, 100,000 issues at a time.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure they're probably under $1 a comic.
Yeah, but at the same time, I feel like at the end of the day, it's still got to be about in that similar kind of realm, because it's like once I start seeing books that are like $10+, and they're just like a regular 20-page one, it's just kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, it's asking a lot. I mean, like, I get if it's a thick one, that totally makes sense. You know what I mean? If you get like a double issue or anything like that, well, I mean, it's a double issue, so $10 is that perfect.
Yeah, I always explain that, because number 6 was 50 pages just about. So I always, when I go through the list of the price, I'm like, oh, these are all 5 except this one's 10, but it's 50 pages.
Yeah, it's a double issue. It's a big book. You know what I mean? And that totally makes sense to me, and so on. But yeah, I always just feel like it's just got to be reasonable. I mean, yeah, it's like, it'd be nice to kind of have it there, but and I wrestled with that $10 price tag, because I got through with issue 5. And then I'm like, holy crap, I got so much story left to tell. And so I thought about breaking 6 up into 2 books and make it 7. But ever since issue 1, I've been doing it. I've been saying it's a 6-issue series. So I didn't want to advertise for number 5. Just kidding. There's going to be 7. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's like one of those ones. A lot of times I always tell people if they get an issue that ends up being a bunch of pages, you should just put on there so it looks like that giant size X-Men issue where you really advertise 56 pages of full detail, and just give it that almost old fashioned high octane action. Yeah, like one of those ones. Just go for it and just make it like that and so on like that. But yeah, no, I mean, your books have, right off the bat, you open any of them up, and that was the first thing I thought when I saw yours, I guess, 6+ months ago or whenever when we first met. I'm like, dude, all the artwork just literally pops off the page, just totally killer stuff. awesome
thank
action,
you.
fun-looking characters, and everything like that. I mean, it was one of those ones like I felt like, yeah, give me all you have. It was one of those easy ones like I don't even have to look anymore. You know, it's not like one of those ones where sometimes you sit there and you're kind of flipping through and you're like, it's interesting, but do I really want it? This was like, oh, dude, this is awesome. I'm sold. I'll take it.
I appreciate it. But yeah, I just, I learned, I cut my teeth on 90s. I collecting comics in the 90s. That's how I learned to draw, was just drawing, copying Todd McFarlane or Jim Lee or any of those guys. I don't think I took a professional art class till I went back to college later in life and started learning more fine details. But so I've really just, that's where that visual style, like a visual of a comic will get me to buy it before a story will 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
I mean, no matter how much I like the writer, I'll flip through, and if I think the art is janky, then I'm probably going to pass it by unless it's a writer I really love.
Yeah, I kind of know there, or unless like if the art is that kind where it's like there's like the kind of janky art, but it actually looks completely unique. I sometimes kind of like that. Like the best way I can kind of say it, I'm drawing the blank on the guy's name, but the guy who makes the Girl Scout comics, and they're spelled girl as in GRRL Scouts because he got, I think, sued by the Girl Scouts at one point.
Yeah,
or a cease and desist kind of letter came in, probably because it was, it's hard like R kind of book and so on, and everybody's doing drugs and stuff in there. But like that art's so weird and so bizarre, and everything, it would like give like an art school teacher like a heart attack if they saw that book because everything is off. But it's almost like it's so off in a cool way.
A good mainstream example of that was there was a comic that came out by DC last year, and I reviewed it for my channel, and it's called I Am Not Starfire. And the book itself is horrendous. Like, it's terribly written. But the artwork, while not at all traditional comic art, is just so interesting. The artist, the way they can put their panels together, and like every character has not only a color scheme to themselves, but when they appear in a panel and they're supposed to be the ones talking, the panel kind of takes on their colors.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
It was really, flipping through it, I hated the book.
Yeah.
I was gonna rip it apart online, but I flipped through it again. I'm like, but I found myself actually kind of drawn to the artwork a bit, and it's not something I normally would have liked because it's this weird kind of Illustrator, digital Tumblr kind of artwork. But this artist had an eye for design, and it carried over. And I almost feel like after looking at it again, it's like this artist was too good for this book.
Yeah, well, because I remember, I want to say my buddy Dunnigan from the Old Man Orange podcast, I remember he got that book and he said the same thing too. He's like, dude, it has like the stupidest story in it or whatever.
That's
like,
awful.
Yeah, it's like that. But like, it's kind of weird how sometimes there'll be some books be like, yeah, but the art actually is kind of cool. I mean, that a lot of times happens to me is like, I'll buy a certain book just because it's got something cool and unique. And a lot of times what I always kind of call is I like when Marvel and DC does that, where they get almost like an individual type artist. Because, sometimes I always feel it's not the main books, but sometimes like you would say like the B books of Marvel and DC, like kind of like here's the, it's not the main X-Men, it's not the main Batman, but here's like the third, issue we have this month. They'll have that kind of artwork where it's like, I call it kind of a generic comic book artwork. There's nothing technically bad about it, but it just looks like someone just like almost like a robot kind of put together. They went to school and it's missing all like creativity. But then they'll be like that D book where they sort of allow like just like a real like creative artist who probably once again would fail any art class, but you see their work and you're like, oh man, this is awesome. Like one, for example, that I liked a lot was that Matt Fraction's Hawkeye. Like that artwork I thought was so cool, and that like drew me into it. And then plus it had a cool storyline as well.
Great story.
So you get the double whammy there. But like I like when they have that kind of artwork where it's just like, here's this experimental artwork, and that stuff to me is always like, really inspiring and so on.
Well, and a lot of the time too, when you get into like a Web of Spider-Man level book, or even a fill-in artist on a book or backup artist, a lot of the time these are guys who are just getting an opportunity. They're just getting a break, so they're putting everything on those pages that they got. I mean, they're throwing every trick they know into putting this project together in hopes of getting more work or a better assignment. So every now and then you'll find somebody, you're flipping through, and whether the art's kind of your style or not, you can just tell that this guy just threw all of himself into this. And he just put out the best art his hand is capable of producing, was put on this page. And you could tell they were just meticulous about it and just gave it everything that they had to try to impress whoever it was they wanted to impress, to be able to just to get work for another month.
Yeah, exactly. They'll just put out this really neat stuff, and then you can tell they're not like the, I guess you would say, like the company men artist who just like, hey, you know what? It's almost like working like a union. Like, this is how you draw Spider-Man. You don't go out of the way of this. We all keep it in line and so on, like that.
Well, yeah, you could tell back in the 70s and 80s. I mean, Marvel and DC, they both had house styles.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell. I get a lot of these books. I can't tell the artists apart half the time.
No. Well, that's like when you look at like those original Frank Miller Daredevil ones, and it's like if you were used to seeing Frank Miller from like I mean, I should say like Dark Knight Returns on up, you would just go like, wait a second. That artwork doesn't even look anywhere near the same. It actually, almost in a weird way, it makes it look like, because Frank Miller's always had that thing where he can draw one panel that's really awesome, and then he can have one panel that looks very sloppy. And I like that look. I like how it does that. But like the very first time you look at those books, you're like, what's wrong with this guy? Like he drew this really great Batman, and then this other one just looks like almost like he let his son come in to draw the next one. Like it's so off.
I know.
But that's almost what makes it more magical, I think, in the long run. Is I like that kind of Frank Miller work. But then you go back to some of that early Daredevil, and you're like, wow, it's like he draws everything almost like really like in perfect proportions and so on like that. But it's missing that extra charm that I think comes later on with like Sin City and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. The only place I really feel in Frank Miller's run where you see the seeds of what Frank Miller is when he's drawing Elektra. Because she's got that Sin City look to her specifically, like in the eyes and the hair and the outfit. Mm-hmm. And going forward, you could tell that was, and if everybody, because I'm pretty sure he created or co-created Elektra.
I think something like that.
Yeah, and so you can tell, like, this is his character. This is the one he put his signature on. Everybody else, it felt like he was just kind of renting time with.
Yeah,
and so when it went to Sin City, you could see the transition already started there. But like you said, I mean, his Daredevil looked a lot like if like John Romita Sr. was drawing Daredevil. It was all feathery, shadowing, and everything else in the beginning, and he got a little bit more like. Kind of dynamic with his square jaw lines, everything towards the end, but it was still not what I would, if you showed me Daredevil and a Sin City, I wouldn't have put those together as the same artist.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, those Daredevil books are really amazing. Story-wise, everything about them fantastic.
Oh, great.
But it's just, it's weird how like, he almost like, it's like, so he could totally draw like this, but he chooses to draw like a lot more just like very creatively and almost like kind of cartoony, and but that becomes his own style, and things like that. And that's almost it. Is like cool, unique artwork is always sometimes will sell me something that's more than something that's more like in that like, it's perfectly proportioned, and everybody used every ruler and tool and like the old tool chest and what have you just to make it as perfect as possible. I'm like, because it's like sometimes if it gets too perfect, then it almost like loses that like freehand kind of design.
Yeah. One artist who demonstrates that is Mark Bagley. I kind of define him as the Spider-Man artist now, because I'm almost certain he's drawn Spider-Man more than anybody else on Earth. And but he is that very technical, perfect comic book artist. I mean, you can put him on any title, and it's going to look professional and clean and polished. And you'll still be able to recognize his style because he's got kind of a way he draws faces and does shadowing and stuff. But he kind of, when he went to Ultimate Spider-Man and got to have a little bit more freedom with the character, you saw a little bit of change in his style, and he brought that over when he came back to the character. But he's kind of your polished, we need a book done, put Mark Bagley on it. And you can always tell, because every time they reboot Spider-Man lately, they have these big storylines. Like they just wrapped up Spider-Man Beyond. Before that, it was Spider-Man Kindred. Mm-hmm. And they do these every week as a Spider-Man title, and then they're getting towards the end, and Mark Bagley will come in and just finish the book. They've done it the last 3 reboots in a row.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, the book's falling apart. Bring in Mark Bagley to
literally save the day there, and back in action. But I know we're kind of getting towards the end. I know we're just doing a little short, like almost like a mini podcast here. But Branden, what's some of the things you got coming up for your new book? I know you said, we got the new issue coming out, number 7, the little tie-in one there coming up for the next run and so on like that. I know you got some Comic-Cons coming up. What else you want to kind of give a little shout out there?
Let's see. I've got comic show not a week from tomorrow in Modesto. I'm going to be at the Powerhouse show in Pleasanton next month. I think those are the and the Lodi Grape Festival on May 6th.
That's always a good one.
Is it? I've never. I think it's hilarious. I mean, I love grapes. So
Yeah, I've been to that one about 3 times. It's actually a very impressive Comic Con. Last time, for some reason, the air conditioning was out, so it was quite terrible. It was like 100 degrees inside and humid and yeah, not made for comic books. Let's say that. But
no.
But generally, when everything's working there and so on like that, it's a really good sized one. There's a lot of people there. You know, I mean, it still has the same thing that, you know, you'll probably be one of, you know, if you're lucky, 5 comic book artists. But I feel that's the inevitable. I really want to start a show because I almost don't think anybody else is going to do it. But I just really want to make a show where it's just comic book creators only. It's just no fan art, no action figures. No,
like the old alternative press expo they used to have in the Bay Area.
Yeah, just something like that. Because I feel like that's what's missing. Is because we just gotten to that point where, sadly enough, there's too. Once again, as we said at the beginning of the episode, there's too many different, you know, genres of stuff all together, and you know, a lot of times the person who's in the action figures is probably not going to be in the comic books. If they're into anime, you never know, they might not be once again in the comic books. Same with like wrestling and any of the other stuff that they kind of have in there. It would be nice because it could be, you know, 1/8 the size, but if you had a Comic-Con that was literally like, hey, there's 20 comic book artists and writers and so on here, and you sold it that way, and you made sure people kind of knew, because I think now the downfall is everybody, like the general public associates a Comic-Con with just anything and everything, like a flea market of like comic books and anime type paraphernalia. But
well, heck, at that Level Up show in Las Vegas, they had the World Super Smash Brothers tournament.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is the video games. Don't realize, as much as I love video games, I've just watched is like every year those things take up more and more space at Comic Cons and so on like that.
Yeah, they do.
And I kind of hate to say it, just because you play video games does not mean you might not read at all. So those things aren't this, you know, they don't convert over as easily as I think somebody thinks, you know. I mean, I know the guys selling the tickets, the more stuff you can jam pack in there, the more $5 tickets you can sell for people coming through the door, and I get that, but you know, for the creators, I feel like we need something that's a little bit more centered towards, like, you know, you want a place where like everybody coming in is looking for comic books and is into that kind of stuff and so on. And so it's not like, it's almost that kind of thing where I feel like we're almost to that point where we're pitching selling a car to somebody who doesn't even have a license, and they're never going to get a license. You know what I mean? So what are they going to do with a car?
We're trying to sell a car to somebody with a saddle. They've come for a horse.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and it's like, that's why I'm almost getting to the point, like, if I can't find a Comic-Con, I'm almost thinking about, like, maybe it's just, you just got to start, like, just create a little Comic-Con and just invite all the indie comic book people that we know, and just kind of say, like, hey, we're going to keep it small, but we're going to sell it just as is. Like, this is what you get. If you're into comic books, come here. You know, that's what we're delivering, a pure Comic-Con.
We should just try to get permission to like show up in someone's parking lot and get a dozen or so guys together. And I mean, people see on the road and just stop and look.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have even a parking lot in mind that might even be, you know, at least an experimental place and so on like that. Or the other one too is, if all you gotta do is, the other place would be to find a comic book store that had a nice parking lot or something like that too. So then it would just tie in with the comic book store, and then I feel that's like a double whammy for everybody, and everybody already knows where a comic store is, so you're not sending them on like a goose chase to some new location.
Yeah, during the pandemic, they started this little underground comic convention thing that I attended one of them. And they would just find big parking lots, usually like churches or something, and people would back their cars into a parking space, open their trunks or their hatchbacks and whatever, and have comics. And there was a space in between everybody, and the tables were way the heck out in front for people to look at product. Yeah. And it was fun. And I mean, I did it because, you know, I was trying to move. I was having crappy online sales during the lockdown, so I was trying to sell some comics.
Yeah. Well, see, and that's kind of like, I even like the idea of like doing the parking lot style, because once again, like that, you know what's the best part about that is you don't have to really take anything out. You know, you just back up, open up your trunk, open up, you know, whatever you got, you know, put your tailgate down, and you're ready to go. You don't have to really drag everything in and set everything up. You know, I mean, you'll set some things up. But,
exactly.
You know.
I mean, if you've got to pick like a folding table, then that's great. But otherwise, just have them in the trunk of the car or whatever. It's
whatever you want to do. But that, you know what? that's something that I'm thinking about. If nobody else is going to do it, at some point, I feel like going to have to make the initiative on that one. But
yeah, well, I'd show up. I'd show up to that.
yeah, as I said, like I'm just trying to think. It's like that'd be kind of fun, just to find a place where it wouldn't cost too much to rent it out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Don't even have to charge a fee for people coming in. Just be like, hey, we're just do it like in a sense it'd feel like we're just doing like a pop up flea market of comic books. But
yeah, exactly.
But that's all we need though. That's all I'm asking for.
Right. I mean, it's not like we're selling anything that costs a fortune. So
Yeah. So something to think about in the future. But Branden, I know I got to kind of take off. And I know this is our short and sweet podcast, but that doesn't mean that, coming up soon, we just have to jump on, do it some more, because I have a feeling we could talk for hours on all kinds of good stuff
yeah,
here.
absolutely.
But at least we got the little one in there. I felt like that kind of got the shoe in the door and everything like that. It's like, okay, now we're rolling, now we're going, and so on like that. Branden, if anybody's looking for your book, what's the best places to send them to?
Best place to send to right now, I've got an Indiegogo on demand. You can just pop in there and type in the book's title, Malevolent Rising, and you can get them all there because I'm still doing fulfillment on that one. And right now, since all the books are done, if you pick them up, they usually ship within about a week of the order.
Awesome. And then you got a website or anything too?
Yeah, it's actually midnightcomics.net.
Perfect. I'll put that for sure in the description, everything like that. Make that nice and easy to access. And then, yeah, you got to pick this book up. It's totally awesome. 6 issues so far, correct? 7 just about on its way. And
7 should be up, probably up for order in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Sweet. Well, I know for sure when we run into each other again at a Comic-Con, I'll definitely have to pick that up from you.
Yeah.
But till then, Branden, you take care. And then, as I said, we'll just jump on this podcast a little bit later, and we'll just continue where we left off in a sense.
All right. Yeah, I appreciate it.
No problem, dude.